I want to begin with a short video. I asked Kid President, I don't know if you know Kid President. You do? Wonderful. I asked him to help us today and tell us about how we should go about thinking about how we're going to change our world. For me, talking about well-being and flourishing is a way in which I've sort of tried to heal my own sort of situation. I've become very open about why I do the work I do. I never was until 3 years ago. The reason I focus on positive mental health and flourishing is because it's what keeps me in recovery. I suffer from PTSD and depression, and I never used to talk about that. And I'm not alone. I'm not alone at all. And in fact, I think we all have to come out of the closet if we're ever going to focus on positive mental health. Thank you. And I have to tell you, that's never easy. But it's getting easier because that's just a part of me, and that's just a part of you. It reflects where we've been. And I don't want anyone to fix me or my friends who have mental illness. I want them to help us learn how to live with the things that has made us who we are. There's nothing wrong with it. I can learn to live with that in a very good way, and Flourishing has taught me that. But Kid President talks a language that I want us to talk about, and it is how we're going to change the world.
There are lots of ideas how you can change the world. Some people think you should just complain about it. That won't change the world, it'll just make it bad. Some people think you have lots of money. Make it rain everywhere you go. Holla for $1. Some people think you have to be really loud and yell a lot. It's like with a bullhorn shouting, "Hey you, yeah you, do it my way right now, you heard?" Other people choose to just make fun of everything. That's dumb, everyone's dumb. It's easy to make fun of stuff, but it's cooler to make stuff. Some people think changing the world can only be done by the smartest person in the world. Just put them in a room, let them figure it out. The solution of world hunger? Food. Wow, that's so amazing. Some people see the bad in the world and they just decide to ignore it. But that won't help anything. Some people think you have to be really famous and super cool. In fact, lots of people think you have to be really powerful to make a difference. Like being mayor, or senator, or president. But the truth is, a title doesn't make you more important. The world is changed by you. It's one person filled with love. And they just have to live it out, so they do something awesome. Then that person is filled with love, and they do something awesome. It just goes on and on and on and on. And the next thing you know, everything's awesome. Some people think it's impossible to change the world.
It's impossible to change the world.
Well, you can see why they could think that. Living in the world with kids who are hungry, people who are homeless, families weren't happy. I'm just trying to figure it out like everybody else, man. I do know this, though. Next time you feel overwhelmed or totally alone, remember this. Things don't have to be the way they are. The world is changed by ordinary people. Little people living out big love. And that's what gives the world a reason to dance. So, how do we change the world?
Well, I'm with Kid President. I don't know about you, but I think well-being and flourishing, whatever you want to call it, orients us to an approach to changing the world that is about bringing something that has to do with love, something that you want for other people. I want to prevent as much mental illness as I can. Because the fact of the matter is, nothing that medicine or counseling has to offer can cure me or anyone who has mental illness. In fact, I could show you an article and a quote that I have on my slides. Well, if you come to the workshop, we'll go over that. That has to do with the current state of affairs for treating mental illness. And the director of the NIMH had this to say about it. All treatments, whether they're medical or talk therapies, are palliative. All are palliative. They merely treat symptoms. Now, I'm not against treatment. Treatment has been very helpful to me in getting me back on my feet to do the things that I want to do. And what I want to focus on is what makes life worth living. And that's what keeps me in recovery. So that's something I have started to say I want to share with the world. And the problem is that mental illness is going up, not down. We tend to be focusing in, more and more on what's inside of human beings. That is, what's happening in your brain, what's in your genetics, what hormones are going up and down, what neurotransmitters are there or not there. And that's all good and well. But they still haven't found a cure. And the average age of onset for most mental disorders now, whether it's mood disorders, anxiety disorders, or substance abuse, the average age for anxiety disorders in your country and mine are just below the age of 15. Next in line, at the average age of 20 to 21, are substance abuse disorders. And finally, by the age 25 to 26, are the first onset of mood disorders. If you want to call that success, be my guest. I call that a reason for changing the way we do things. So, I have a bunch of fancy slides. I'm not going to bring them out today. I want to keep this to a half hour, as I promised, and open it up for discussion. If you come to the workshop, we'll get nerdy about data then, all right? But we can measure positive mental health today in the same way, with the same rigor that we can measure things like depression. And in fact, if you look at my work, I stole mercilessly from the DSM and how they measure depression. In fact, the criteria for flourishing were borrowed from the criteria for depression. To flourish means that you have to have one of three facets of emotional well-being almost every day or every day in the past month, combined with 6 or more of the signs or symptoms of functioning well in life, almost every day or every day. Now, does that sound familiar to those of you who know how to diagnose depression? It's depression turned onto its head. Now, that was just a starting point. What was it? 14, 15 years ago. And those criteria have really helped sort of carve nature at its joints. Because if you're not flourishing, here's what life looks like. You're at 3 to 6-fold increase of becoming mentally ill, even if you've never had an episode in your life, just because you are not flourishing, because you're not mentally healthy. The risk of mental illness increases. Now, what does that tell you? When the world is populated by people who are neither flourishing nor mentally ill. In fact, 50% of US college students are not mentally ill, but they're not flourishing. I looked at the data that Suting sent to me from 7 universities here in Ontario, and it's even a little worse. I hate to tell you, but more US college students are flourishing than Canadian college students, at least in Ontario. About 48 to 49% US college students and barely 40 to 43% Canadian college students. Now, that's not good news. That's not good news at all. But this is not the point where we should despair, because we're learning more and more every day about how we can actually change this. For instance, there's now work that's being done in the Netherlands, uses a very simple protocol that's been around for years called acceptance and commitment therapy. combined with mindfulness. Now that's been around a long, long time. A long, long time. Right? We heard our elder talking about the mind. This mind has a way of wanting to avoid difficulties in life, and especially uncomfortable feelings. And in fact, it's not good for us to avoid experiences, especially the experiences that bring us to a place where we might be sad or fearful or even angry. Those are the moments where you need the power of the mind to slow things down and to think about how it is that you can respond with integrity and dignity to something that would otherwise make you react. They applied this protocol for 8 weeks, 2 hours at a time, teaching people how to be more accepting of uncomfortable experiences. And then to help them learn about what are their most deeply held commitments and values. And then they learn skills about how to respond that's consistent with what they're deeply committed to. And then with mindfulness and the ability to be not reactive in the moment, they practiced how to respond with integrity in the midst of sadness or despair. Now, I don't know about you, but I've done some things, and I didn't realize it until I had PTSD, that I didn't even know would trigger me. I didn't even know what trigger meant. And before I knew it, I was reacting and made things worse, and I went back for weeks feeling terrible about myself, guilty, and I would beat myself up. No, Corey, you're about love and compassion. How can you be angry and make people feel bad? You know how hard that was to finally have to face that and learn that? But now I can slow it down. I can say, here is how I want to leave things. Here is how I want to feel about myself and the world that I am a part of, where we will experience suffering, we will experience difficulties. And believe it or not, it's made me happier. Now, I don't want a lot of bad experiences coming on, but I say bring them on. Bring it on. You can't shake this tree. Bring it on. It's wonderful to be calm and steady in a world of change. It's wonderful. And I think we live in a world where there's simply too much going on in our young people, whether it's adolescents or college students. I hear this again and again. Well, I don't have enough time. I can't sleep. I have to be working. I have to be doing something. And usually it's work. And that's never done. They have no compass except the future. Now, looking to the future is great, but they're never in the present. Never. Why? Because they hear again and again from us, well, you're supposed to become something. You're supposed to get a life. You're supposed to find yourself. So none of that's there right now. I've heard my students, when I ask them, aren't you living your life right now? They say, no. And that was the strangest thing for me to hear the first time I asked my student. I said, well, what the hell are you doing right now? I said, excuse me, but really, what are you doing here? We're at college. You're not living your life? She said, no. Well, what are you doing? Well, I am getting all the things I need so that I can live my life. And then we talked more about, well, isn't that a stressful way to be thinking about right now? And she said, yes, because if I don't get A's or I don't get B pluses, the life I want to live will not be possible. And I thought to myself, oh my God, what have we done? College was meant to be a place where we explored issues that go into flourishing. For instance, What is going to be the direction and meaning of your life? Another example. What are you learning here that will give you the tools to contribute anything of value to the world? Where do you belong? What will be your community? Are you accepting not only of yourself, but are you accepting of a world of difference, of people who don't think like you, don't look like you, don't always act like you? And are you confident to think and express your own ideas and opinions? Shouldn't that be the things we're doing when we're trying to educate the mind? And I would add to the educating the heart. That's what flourishing is. It's a combination of feeling good about a life where you've got things like purpose, contribution, belonging, acceptance, autonomy. And yet they're not living their lives right now. That has to change. That has to change. And I see this in our adults, even in our faculty and our staff. They're always one step behind. They're never quite there. Have you ever heard this on your campuses? You go up to a faculty member or a staff and you ask them, hey, you want to help me do something? You want to help me do something? I said, well, yes, but my plate is full. Anyone hear that? My plate is full. Well, your plates are empty. You had a good breakfast. But I've decided should be our response. Well, then start eating. Start eating. Start doing. Or get it off the plate and get the right things on your plate. Put the right things on your plate that you really want to do. Taking on things just like our students, busy, 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 the language of time deprivation and plates full. It's not the way to be in a world where we're trying to educate the heart and the mind and to inspire and to lift, to elevate, to bring awe, joy, all of those things that we all want, that somehow we're going to get somewhere down the line. I'm tired of waiting. I don't know about you, but I'm tired of waiting. I'm not waiting anymore. If it's not fun, you're doing it the wrong way. If it's not fun, this should be fun. It's serious, but it's kind of like Kid President. It's about love and having fun. Hell, I'll even say let's dance a little. How can it not be fun when you go back to your campuses and want to talk about happiness, satisfaction, interest in life, purpose, contribution, autonomy, mastery, meaning? Promise me that when you go back, you will want to bring something that's worth sharing. All right? That's worth sharing. Whether you call it flourishing, whether you call it happiness, whatever you want to call it. So, I want to end on this note. The challenge is, despite saying it's going to be fun, it will be fun if we keep it that way, but it doesn't mean we're not going to face some challenges. We live in a world, I would call it the either-or world. It's either my way or the highway kind of thing. And this is the kind of response I usually get when I'm giving talks, especially to grand rounds and people who do the serious stuff. And I'm not joking about this, but I am saying, they say it's really serious. I treat mental illness. I treat illness. I treat disorder. Well, they say, okay, well, we can measure things really specifically. In fact, we're far better at measuring illness than this thing you call well-being. They don't really know what we're trying to measure, and that's part of the problem. And in fact, you should come away today, if you come away from the workshop, knowing we can measure it very specifically and in ways that's extremely rigorous and is being validated across cultures, races, and ethnicities, you name it. But that's one response you'll get. Look at our tools. Aren't they shiny? And they belong or come from a thing called the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. And all you need to say is, well, look at this nice shiny thing. It comes from ancient Greek philosophy about the good life. So take that. That's one. Okay, one down. Well, then they will say something like this. Well, we need to focus on cures and better treatments, but especially cures for mental illness. Now, I don't know what it's like in Canada, although it usually always feels better up here, less stress and people more and more cooperative. But in the US, that's a call for saying, give me more of the money. Yeah, I love that laugh. Yeah, give me, kind of like kid, holler for the dollar, give me more. My stuff is really important. And damn it, if I can cure mental illness, that will save the world. What they're operating under is a false assumption that the world and health exists on one continuum. Right? The absence of mental illness or any illness means we're all healthy. No. The evidence shows at the genetic and the phenotypic level, and we've been operating on both and doing studies. The absence of genetic risk or the absence of mental illness does not mean everyone has the genetic potential for flourishing, nor are all the people in your population flourishing. They're not anywhere close. So you should tell them, no, we don't live in your one-dimensional world. The world's made up of two dimensions, and we need both. And you only have an answer to one dimension. We need to work together. They're not used to that. So, okay, then they'll say, okay, Corey, or isn't mental illness a burden? I'll say, yeah, I understand that. But then I know what they're referring to, the Global Burden of Disease Study. 1996 was the first release of the first study. I call that the Declaration of Independence year for those of us with mental illness, especially depression, because before that time, mental illnesses did not show up on the top 10 list of public health concerns. Now, why? Because before 1996, we only measured the degree to which illnesses and disorders shortened our lives. We were only concerned with death. Somebody finally looked at the facts, which was in the 20th century, at least in the United States, we added 30 years of life expectancy in that one century, which is more life than all prior centuries combined. We're living longer. And then they looked at the fact, well, we're living longer, but now the things we deal with are not curable. They're manageable, and they're called chronic diseases. And trust me, mental illness is chronic, relapsing, recurring disorder. So you should say, yes, I get it. But here's the problem. The absence of flourishing is showing that it's also just as burdensome as depression. We got two problems. Then they'll say, okay, wait a minute. There's too much mental illness in the world, Corey. And they might say this to you. Yes. And I'll say, yes, I agree. Guess what? There's not enough flourishing as well. And this will go on and on. You'll hear some versions of it finally to the point, well, wait a minute, we have treatments, and illness is far more serious. To which you would need to respond that there's more and more data showing that it's the earliest losses of good mental health that precede the onset of increasing risk for the very things that we can't cure. I'll tell you what's more important. Putting more of the things in our life that make it worthwhile and prevent the very things we can't cure. I'll tell you what's more important. The things that go into flourishing. Now, what can you tell me that you have that will help us get to that point? Because here's the bottom line. The things that lower the bad, and that's what you focus on, do not elevate the good, which we're focusing on. We need a complementary approach. We don't live in an either-or world. And stop accepting it for that. Promise me. You will not put up with those kinds of responses and challenges. And your response should say, yes, I agree with you, but you need to understand this is also a problem. The absence of mental health. Both. So how to end? Well, I know no better way than with my most favorite quote ever in the world. And it comes from a philosopher named George Santayana. I've used it in my articles and chapters whenever I can because it's, when I think about it, it is the reason for hope. And he said this, that life is worth living is the most necessary of assumptions because without it, it will be the most impossible of conclusions. So if you don't believe, it won't happen. Thanks. All right, so we wanted to leave time for questions, and there's a couple microphones, so don't be shy, come on up, ask some questions, challenge, provoke, be curious. Great.
All right, I'll start us off here. So hi everybody, good morning, and thank you very much for the talk. It's kind of nerdy, I'm a fan. I used a lot of your work in my own master's thesis, so very familiar with the concepts.
Great.
So I don't come from any particular university or college. I'm actually representing the Student Athlete Mental Health Initiative. I'm a co-founder of this very new organization we started up just this past March. And so my question is kind of coming from that camp, but also, I'm sure it applies to a lot of different other people, is sort of that pursuit of excellence and the constant conflict between sort of being happy with what you have achieved, but continually striving to get better. And I really resonated with me when you said, they're preparing for their lives. And so how do we reframe that pursuit in a healthy way where we can be kind of happy with what's going on, but also continually striving to get to that next level? Yeah.
That's a wonderful question because it's really, I think, what we need to sort of be very mindful of and bring back to college campuses. Because the fact of the matter is the father of capitalism had a lot to say. If you go into reading The Wealth of Nations and the Theory of Moral Sentiments, Adam Smith knew that would be the issue for societies that move in the direction of capitalism, and he said that the idea of that we can actually achieve happiness by acquiring was the great deception, right? Acquiring sort of accolades or success. That's what drove civilizations to create and become better. And in fact, that constant dissatisfaction with where you are and wanting more, and the belief that you could actually bring more happiness with it. But if you've only focused on that, which was the dissatisfaction of what you have, you would never achieve happiness. And so he talks about a need for a spiritual path that complements this sort of determination, this determination to be better. And that spiritual path sort of says, well, okay, you take moments, you take Sabbath, you take moments to celebrate, to be, take downtime. It's part of your weekly life. You give praise and worship to the things, as the elder did, to the things that actually sustain life, which brings you back to all the things that enable you to keep moving forward. So you need moments of celebration, savoring, rituals to sort of be grateful, and at the time that you're also saying, well, we should always want more. But that's just one thought. But I would recommend that the world that focuses on the father of capitalism stop just focusing on that money brings happiness or success brings happiness. It's dissatisfaction and the ideal that you can be better that drives improvement, but without balancing that with a life of ritual, Sabbath, celebration, savoring, you cannot enjoy the very things that bring us happiness, which is each other. I don't know what you have to say.
No, that's, thank you. I like that answer.
Good. Thanks. Yes, sir.
Okay, thanks for that, Corey. I guess my question might be a little, actually, since you were talking about capitalism, might be a little capitalistic. We'll get to a second, yeah.
That's okay.
And so, because I'm had a similar experience with acceptance and commitment therapy, totally sold on having a prevention approach to mental health. That's because I was so shocked. Why didn't anybody tell me about these things before? And I could have prevented all these things that happen. And so, when I look at the system, though, we very much have a system that's an illness-first approach. The price of admission is you get an illness and then we treat you.
The only way to get admission, is to break down.
This weird bar. Yeah, if you get sick enough, we'll help you. But now that we have these big systems devoted to that, do you see those systems making a change quick enough? Or do you see other, whether it's consumer products and things like that popping up to help people, work on flourishing and things like that. Yeah, so that's kind of the thing. Yeah, do you see systems changing?
Well, I sense in your question that you have some opinions on this, which is okay, and bring them out, because here's my thought. And here's where I'll say that the curse of positive psychology comes in, because it's not allowing enough attention to bring what we're talking about to a public health level. It's becoming very much tailored to individuals, and selling books and selling apps, and all those things are like drops of water that fall on different parts of parched land. I think it gets in the way, actually, of delivering something that ought to be delivered to whole populations. And that requires a commitment from a nation. And I think that the stuff about commercializing distracts from that, because it leads us to believe, well, why aren't you just going out and making it available to yourselves? So I don't see the system changing unless we create a system at a national level that has the same resources that the illness-only system has. Because without that equality, it's the same thing in college students. When I say, well, we ought to focus on this, but they'll say, well, we don't get credit for this. And I agree. We ought to be teaching this stuff. We ought to treat it just as seriously. So that's just my opinion. But what are your thoughts?
That's encouraging, though. Yeah,
okay.
That's good to hear. Yeah, thank you.
Oh, you're not going to tell us. I think you have some idea.
My band? No, see, that's what I'd love to see. Absolutely. You need, anytime you want to make systemic change, you have to do it at a big level. It has to be something that everyone's embracing publicly, and that it's a big uniform shift, because otherwise it becomes this niche thing, and like you say, it's just, go do that thing over there.
Yeah, add that to your life. Add that to your list, right? I just wrote a blog on our company blog site, and I said, I'm done with to-do lists. I want a to-be list. I'm done with them. I mean, put the things on your list that you want in your life, not the things you want to get off and out. And we need a change in a world that we live in that is going to make this to say, this is what we want for our people. This is what we value. And we want it so much that we're going to talk to you about how to change your workplace, your educational systems, and whatnot. How can we make this happen? If it doesn't come from the top, I'm not convinced it will ever bubble up from the bottom.
Yeah. No, that sounds great. Let's make it happen.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you.
So, Corey, I have used your work since the MIDAS study, 2002. So I work in clinical setting, and some of my best clinical moments have come using the flourishing eudaimonic, the good life model, with people who have depression, borderline personality disorder. And that, I think, is a wonderful way for reducing the stigma, which you also talked about when you talked about yourself, too. But the problem is, I applied for grants with NIMH, also in Canada, and again, the outcome measure they are looking is very symptomatic. So my small studies data show that you can actually reduce the symptoms just by focusing on the good life measures. So what would be your advice? Because it's almost sounds frustrating now.
Well, you sound frustrated, and I do, and I am too, by that very thing. I mean, foundations will support this work. I mean, we were blessed, and if it wasn't for the MacArthur Foundation supporting in the 80s and 90s the successful aging networks, I swear to God, none of this, we wouldn't be here talking about this, because now, I mean, we take that all for granted, but very little support goes towards this now. But that research, I think, has really paved some roads. That said, here's another reason for top-down. I mean, if you do not change this at the national level where you give equal amounts of money to agencies that fund research and says this is as much of a priority for the very reasons all the research suggests, right? And there's plenty of research suggesting this should be as much of a priority. You're not going to get changes, because you know as much as I know that academics move, they're like ants. You put a little sugar over here, they go blah, 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 over here. But the sugar is money, blah, blah, right? And universities are complicit with that because, right, we're all supposed to be fundraisers now because we live in an economic downtime, and every faculty is supposed to be getting grants. And where do you go? Where the money is. So unless you change the money and the things that people are willing to support, we're always going to be working on the fringes. And something has to change. Now, having said that, how do you do that? This kind of summit should also include people who are funders. There ought to be a summit for the people at the national level who have the Canadian Health Institute and all these other things, and they need to be educated, just like the people at NIMH, all the National Institute of Health need to be educated, but they're the most, I won't say it. You know what I was going to say. I love Francis Collins and what he does, but you know what he focuses on? It's all under the hood. They would not believe that they have anything to learn from us, and that's the saddest thing in the world.
Thank you.
So unfortunately, we have to move on, and that was the last question we could answer. But Corey will be here through the day and to pitch to all the data heads the workshop that's coming this afternoon. But I wanted to take this time to thank you so much, Corey, for a very inspiring keynote and the generosity for sharing of yourself today.
Thank you.